I'm always learning new things, which means I'm constantly evolving and growing. And there's 9 things that specifically I'm going to be doing a little bit different this year when it comes down to my fat loss regimens. The first thing, I'm going to put more emphasis on my gut health. I know it's not that exciting sounding, but the literature is just too hard to deny. There is so much science coming out about it starting in our guts, whether it comes down to protein synthesis, whether it comes down to fatty acid mobilization, whether it comes down to glucose modulation. It doesn't mean that I'm gonna sit here and pop probiotics all day. It means that I'm going to focus on things that protect my gut. And I'm gonna put more emphasis on my gut barrier. So that means I'm going to consume things like collagen. I'm going to consume things like bone broth. I'm going to use things like colostrum now and then. And I'm going to focus on foods that do not break down our gut barrier. So I'm going to avoid emulsifiers. Look out for things like polysorbate 80, polysorbate 20. These things have a lot of literature behind them, at least mechanistically, when it comes down to breaking down your gut barrier. Also, I'm avoiding trans fats. I'm avoiding them like the plague. I do not touch them at all. And I'm just putting a lot more of a conscious foot forward when it comes down to my gut health. And I think if you do the same, you might notice a pretty big difference. It's probably one of the biggest levers you can pull. This next one, number 2, is something that I had to learn the hard way. And it sounds like I'm turning into a big baby, but I'm actually just getting a little bit wiser in how I look at my workouts. I'm going to tone down the intensity on my workouts some days per week. You see, in the past, I would just go all the way intense all the time. And I'll tell you why that became problematic. Because the literature is starting to suggest that the more that you push your intensity, the more your ghrelin response kind of elevates, your appetite response. And if you have a lot of intensity on top of a lot of intensity on top of a lot of intensity, your ghrelin response is essentially growing at a disproportionate rate to your actual caloric burn. So for example, if I work out and I burn 300 calories in 20 minutes, I might signal to my brain that I need more like 400 calories. Now, that's not actual numbers, that's just theory. But think about it like this. If you start pushing intensity all the time, your brain is going to do whatever it can in sort of a compensatory fashion to get you to compensate for that. And if it's a runaway train, it can be problematic. Ask yourself this question. When you go for a long walk, let's just say 2 hours, do you feel like you actually make up those calories later in the day? Usually you don't. But if you were to train totally crazy for an hour, you'd probably come out of that workout very hungry. I am all about intensity, and I still absolutely train with a lot more intensity than last time. But I am now consciously having workouts where I'm a little lower intensity and longer duration. This way, I am in control of my appetite and I'm not throwing it all away. This year for me is all about control of my appetite versus just trying to restrict calories and count calories here and there. I want to be able to trust my natural instincts because that's how I'm going to be able to do this for the long haul. The third thing I'm doing differently is I'm utilizing essential amino acids more. When I was overweight, I don't think there was as much of a purpose for essential amino acids for me because I had enough extra fuel on hand, right? I was overweight. I had tissue that my body could pull from. But now that I'm leaner, it becomes very important that if my goal is to stay in a specific range, that I sip on these essential amino acids. My opinion has changed a little bit on essential amino acids because I used to be fearful because of the insulin spike. And don't get me wrong, nothing has changed there. Essential amino acids do spike your insulin, but they do so in a way that is different from when you eat carbohydrates. If you spike your insulin with essential amino acids, you have a subsequent glucagon spike too. What this means is that you're not necessarily inhibiting fat burning, you're just kind of protecting the muscle a little bit. Although, for the sake of fasting, essential amino acids would technically break a fast because the body does register them as nutrition. It does spike what's called mTOR. That's a discussion for a different day. The bottom line is I'm sipping on them throughout the day because they seem to regulate my appetite a little bit more. So if I'm not fasting, I might have some between meals, or I might have them while I do cardio. Number 4 is a huge one, and it comes with brand new cutting edge research that came out of a study published in Cell Reports in December of 2023. So this has been the biggest And I mean the biggest game changer for me in what I'm implementing this year. This study demonstrated that we can have 100 grams of protein, possibly more, possibly no real upper limit, and our body will actually utilize it. We used to think we could only have 35 or 40 grams of protein at the most at the end of a workout. The literature is pretty clear, and this was a very legit study utilizing a tracer method where they followed the amino acids and watched where they went in a human model. This was very, very cool. So what's different now? Well, now at the end of my workouts, I'm having like 75, 100 grams of protein, and then I'm going 5-6 hours without eating, because what the literature shows is that you can have a large amount of protein after your workout, and then it digests for hours later. You don't need to eat 35 grams and then have another 35 grams 2 or 3 hours later. You can have a big chunk of protein post-workout. Now, what's interesting is this cascades into a different way of thinking around all meals. Because I used to sit there thinking, okay, I can only get X amount of protein with this meal. How am I ever gonna get all this protein in while I'm in a caloric deficit and still somewhat enjoying the foods that I love? But what I've realized now is, like, we're seeing the literature. It's not about how much protein you take in at one time. It's about how much time do you give that protein to digest. If I wanted to theoretically have 150 grams of protein with breakfast, I could. I just need to accept the fact that that might take 6 or 8 or 12 hours to digest. So there's no free rides. You're not getting additional protein synthesis on top of what you ordinarily would. You're just getting it when you want it, somewhat on demand. Now, why this is so cool for me is now I can say, all right, I want to have some eggs, and I want to have maybe a little bit of ground beef in my eggs. And then if I say, well, shoot, I'm going to be busy all day, I can't have lunch. So I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to add a 35 gram protein shake along with this breakfast too, and get even more protein. And then I'm good. I can skip lunch and I don't have to worry about it because my body is literally synthesizing this protein all day. So sometimes I'll use a whey protein shake, sometimes I'll use a plant-based protein shake. It all depends on realistically what I'm in the mood for. If I'm using whey, generally it's a whey protein isolate. If I'm using a plant-based shake, there's really only 1 or 2 brands that I ever recommend because a lot of them are filled with soy and other garbage. The one I use is from SunWarrior. That link down below is for their active line. That is also a 20% off discount link for whatever you want to get from SunWarrior. But their plant-based protein is different from other plant-based proteins. It's utilizing pumpkin seed protein, and it also utilizes other protein combinations to make sure you're getting a complete amino acid profile, but they have digestive enzymes, they have probiotics in them, and they have fatty acids in them, so you're getting a nice spectrum of nutrition. So it's almost like a whole food. So don't get me wrong, I'm not a plant-based guy. I will literally have a SunWarrior shake alongside my steak and eggs. For me, it's about getting a well-rounded amino acid profile and also getting different nutrition and some fiber in the mix too. So that link down below saves you 20% off. Again, using that specific link, it's in the top line of the description underneath this video. Their tastes are unbelievable. They're cake batter flavor, brand new cake batter flavor, out of this world. Now, number 5 is very similar to number 4, but it's specific for if I'm intermittent fasting, which I still do about 2 or 3 days per week. So what am I doing in 2024? Am I fasting more? No, I'm probably fasting a little bit less. I'd say in 2023 and years prior, I would fast 3, maybe 4 days per week. Now I'm fasting more like 2, maybe 3 days per week. But there's a huge change. Based upon, once again, this new literature out of Cell Reports, I now get sufficient protein for sure, even on the days I'm fasting. So when I break my fast, I now have 75 to 100 grams of protein, whereas before, my old rules were probably have a small amount of protein so your body knows how to deal with it, and then have more protein later on. Now I'm like, bring it on, baby. This new literature opens so many doors for me to enjoy the protein that I like right when I break a fast. And there's no more worry about me getting enough protein during my eating period. Number 6 is one that has been around for a while. And it was something that I paid a lot of attention to when I was losing weight 12 years ago. And that is what's called the Randle Cycle. Now, good old Charles Poliquin, I'm showing my age here, but Charles Poliquin used to talk about this all the time. And people used to kind of call him crazy. The Randle Cycle implies that our body can only utilize so many fats and carbohydrates at one sitting, at one time. So basically, if you have high amounts of blood sugar, your body is going to store fat and use the sugar. And vice versa. If you have high amounts of fat available and lower amounts of sugar, it's going to preferentially use the fat and store the sugar, right? It's simple when you think about it. It's from a even like biological, like ancestral perspective. The body's going to use what it has more in abundance of, right? So in this particular case, I think it matters most that we do not mix high amounts of fat and high amounts of carbs when it is a large serving. I think it's perfectly fine to have some avocado with your sweet potato. I think it's perfectly fine to put a little bit of olive oil on your brown rice. I'm not talking about small amounts like that. But what I am going to pay attention to is, well, am I having a large meal with a large amount of carbs and a large amount of fat at one time? The Randle Cycle is a highly debated topic. So I handle it with a grain of fat and carbs, I suppose. I don't totally believe that it's the entire end-all be-all, but I do think that when we are pushing the limits of our caloric sort of equilibrium, that's when it starts to matter the most. So if you're in a deficit, for example, you're 200 calories in a deficit, you could probably get away with combining some fats and carbs a little bit more. But once you reach equilibrium or you're in a surplus, I think combining fats and carbs becomes more problematic. So I'm going to pay more attention to this. Something that I used to do in years prior and I stopped doing over the last couple of years that I think is a really important thing to focus on. Number 7, I'm going to eat a lot more eggs. For some reason, in the first half of last year, I just didn't eat as many eggs. Like I was focusing on leaner protein. I was really trying to get as lean as I possibly could. So I kind of stripped some of the fats out of my diet in the morning. And now I've realized that I was feeling that in my brain and I just really love the taste of eggs. And almost all the literature that I can find utilizing eggs as a protein source is a hugely beneficial thing. So I'll probably be eating at least 5 to 6 eggs probably every day. Number 8, I'm implementing more Reishi mushroom. This isn't a product plug. It's the fact that what I've noticed is I am in much better control of my appetite and therefore much better control in terms of my fat loss when I am calm and when I am in a parasympathetic state. What does that mean? If you're in the fight or flight mode, generally speaking, people don't think about food, right? They have an appetite suppressant effect. But if you're chronically in fight or flight, you're chronically stressed, you'll also stress eat. And it makes it very difficult to regulate and govern how much you're taking in. So what I have noticed is that if I am calm, I make tremendous food choices. It's kind of funny. I'm a little bit of an opposite person, and maybe you're like me. When I go on vacation, I actually don't eat a lot of garbage because I don't even crave it. I feel like I'm in control. I can go to a restaurant and I can order eggs and I can order fruit and I have no desire to touch potatoes or whatever. I can just have it in control. And that is purely a result of my cortisol levels being down and me being in control. So utilizing things like Reishi, utilizing things like cold therapy and hot therapy contrast to gain control, and of course, regular breath work. Sounds cheesy, but it's very important. And the last thing that I'm doing differently this year in terms of my fat loss is I'm focusing a little bit more on rucking, walking around wearing a weighted backpack almost everywhere I go, that is recreational at least, instead of running quite so much. Don't get me wrong, I'm still running about 20 miles a week, but there were periods last year where I was pushing my mileage up to 80, 90 miles per week when I was in marathon prep. Now, that's fun, but the reality is it's not something I plan to sustain for long periods of time. So I'm doing a little more rucking this year, gonna get outside and get out into the mountains more, which I enjoy, wearing a lot of weight, where I feel like I'm getting more of that overall beta oxidation fat burning and a little bit less of that glycolytic zone that I might get if I was running. And if I do end up running more, I'm gonna pay much more attention to staying in a lower heart rate zone so that I can recover better. And once again, the operative word and theme of this video, remain in better control. I'll see you tomorrow.